Now I have a dome. Ho, ho, ho.
Yippee-ki-yay, mother... By Grandpa's hammer, Alan Rickman was certainly a great actor.
All right, take it easy. This isn't a Dan Monroe video. This is a video about cutting the dome for Robby, which is really making the dome. You can see the link in the description, was a much harder process, I think, than cutting it. But cutting it was certainly nerve-wracking. It was something I made the dome for Robby, I think, maybe 2 years ago. And it's something I've put off cutting for a very long time, frankly, until basically I'd finished almost everything else, because I was so concerned that I was going to mess it up somehow and have to pull another dome. The reality is, it really wasn't that bad. I probably spent more time measuring and making sure there were, measure once, cut twice. No, I spent more time measuring to make sure things would go smoothly than I actually spent doing the cutting. So the main thing I want to do in this video is just convince folks they shouldn't be as worried as I was. Now, because I pulled my own dome, there are a few discrepancies, say, with the beautiful ones that Norm Sockwell has made, and that did create a couple challenges in the cutting and a little compromise I had to make on the side here, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Meanwhile, in the past.
Well, after all kinds of measuring and remaking my template a few times here, I realized that the dome is kind of not big enough. And I can tell because on the side here when I measure it, as I mentioned, it sort of flares out here a little bit at the bottom. It needs to go all the way to the bottom. I always thought that I was gonna cut that part away. I thought that the dome was going to have enough extra, but at that point, I just didn't know enough about what I was doing here. And I plan to remake the dome anyway, but I could see there as I measure it and look at some of the angles, it needs to come down a little bit further. Let's see what happened. Let's go look at the dome mold and the plug in the garage. Here's the plug. Well, that's the mold. The plug is underneath it here. Let's take this off for a second. So that's the plug I used when I pulled the mold. And this is the frame that I was using to hold the plexiglass. And the plexiglass sits in between these two pieces. It's sandwiched in there. So you can see that's probably, a little bit, maybe a little bit more than an inch that I should have pulled the dome. And even still, I could only pull the dome all the way to the base of it here. I couldn't pull it any further. So I couldn't pull it past here. It was flaring out a little bit. I think the next time I pull a dome, and there will be some next times, I need to take this plug and just raise it up a little bit on a few pieces of wood maybe, just so I can pull past it. And that'll solve the issue here with the frame as well. Just being able to pull it down a little bit more, I'll get that extra few inches, and hopefully still it'll also be a little bit more snug here. If not, then I'll have to investigate adding some suction, basically making this into a big vacuum table. Oh, and I forgot to mention, there's actually two official versions of Robby's dome. There's the version that he has when he was sold at auction, where the dome doesn't quite go all the way down to the bottom. It's kind of cut at a little bit of an angle. You could see here as it sort of exits where it rests on the mouthpiece. It goes up at about a 45-degree angle, and then it has a straight line all around the back of his head, and that line is just above the head fins. And then there's another version of the dome, the original version of Robby's dome, where the plastic comes all the way down here to the bottom, where this first fin would start around the bottom. And these first fins, I think there's 5. They kind of come up so the plastic goes all the way to the bottom. It comes up here, and then it's scalloped, and it's scalloped over all of the 40 plus fins that go around the back. So the original Robby's dome was much more intricate, I guess, in terms of the cuts and all those individual cuts over the fins. For the version that I have, since I couldn't get all the way down here to the bottom anyway, I'm going for the straight cut all the way across the back with the fins just underneath it.
The suspense is terrible. I hope it'll last.
After setting up the cameras and lighting and measuring and taping, it's time to start cutting the dome. And I'll just let you hear a little bit of the buzzing of the Dremel here, just so you get an idea of the pace at which I was cutting it. Slow and steady, small little sections at the time, carefully following the line. I really should have had a respirator on now because it was throwing up a not insignificant amount of dust. It was good to have the ear and eye protection, but I really think I would, if I were doing it again, I would wear a mask. So make sure you wear a mask. Obviously, I had the garage door open here for ventilation. Just slow and deliberate cuts, being just very careful. I think having the dome, I have a box with a fabric blanket there and the dome sort of resting inside the box, supporting the piece so it doesn't vibrate is also very important. If it starts to vibrate, you'll get little chips. And just going slow and moving the piece frequently so that I don't get a lot of melting. And I think the tape also helped there to both to see where I was cutting, but to keep the scrap pieces and the sharding and the melting to a minimum. I used a black laundry marker to mark my cuts on the blue tape here. If you accidentally get some of that black marker on your dome, some isopropyl alcohol should take it right off. Do a small little test in a discrete area first, but I had no issues. It came off super clean and didn't leave any scratches or any haze or anything on the dome. When I wasn't actively cutting the dome, I stuck in on a bucket. Again, I had a blanket in that bucket and I would stand the dome up in there just to make sure it was adequately supported. Because when it's on its side, there's some flex. So I never really wanted to leave it there too long when I wasn't working with it. Now, for the openings for the radar section, the first thing I did was use my plastic cutting disc and cut out a small rectangular area. I mean, well, specific shape doesn't really matter, but I cut out a little hole just big enough for me to get in a sanding drum that I would mount on the Dremel. Once that hole was in place, I put the sanding drum attachment on the Dremel, and I just carefully sort of ate away at until I got that circular shape that I wanted. It was actually super easy to control. It worked really well, and this is probably the approach that I will use in the future when I do a version of the dome that needs those scallop cuts. I wouldn't try and cut those individually. I would just basically just grind them out with the sanding disc attachment here using the Dremel. And basically, mission accomplished. Now it's time to go install it on Robby and see how it looks.
If you are enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. You don't need a Krell brain boost to build your own Robby.
Okay, moment of truth. Let's see here. Or at least how much more cutting might be required. Might need to widen that ear hole just a tiny bit. Same with that one on the top. But let's see, it should be just above this. Yep, looks good. We got a little bit of extra clearance there for the strip. Oh, just perfect. Tiny little bit. Nope, that's fine on the bottom there. I could shave a tiny little bit off that, but it's not really necessary. Wow, that was stressful. But it came out great. I think I'm just gonna widen the holes just here on the top a tiny little bit. That's the least stressful thing to do. And then, yeah. And as for the sides, because I had to do the sides a little bit differently because of how this thing flared out. That's where there's this long angle here instead of what would normally would have come down here, or even all the way. I think the scalloped one, and then come up across there. But that's fine. I'll just, you know, that's a little bit, again, that's a little bit more space than I'd like. That was just what was necessary with this dome. I'll try and fix that when I pull the next one. Ultimately, that's where the full height fins go, and then there'd be a little bit of extra space here along the sides. For one final test, I wanted to compare a couple of different cutting wheel options on the Dremel. The first is the 456B, which is actually meant for cutting metal. And then I have the 476, which is meant for cutting plastic. And this is what I ultimately used, but how do the two compare to one another? My first attempt was using the 456B, which again is the Dremel disc that is intended for cutting metal. And you'll see initially when I start the cut right at the bottom of the dome where it's the thickest, I get some melting. And so this did not really provide a nice clean cut. Also, it's a little bit hard to hold the piece and to hold the Dremel steady in your hand when it's such a small piece. But you'll see I did get a significant amount of melting there. Next, it's on to the 476, which is meant for cutting plastic. I thought it was going to slice right through it. But again, you'll see where it's thick at the bottom there. I'm initially getting some melting. Again, it's hard to control the piece a little bit in my hand here, holding it a small piece like this. But again, when you look at the cut, significant melting on there. So I was a little bit surprised that both blades performed about the same. For my last attempt, I put some blue tape on both sides of the acrylic, and I also made sure that it was supported a little bit better by sort of bracing it against this old piece of scrap wood I had on the floor here. And this is what led to the best cut. This is actually the 476, the plastic blade, but I got a much smoother cut, and I think it's a combination of the tape and supporting the material. I got a much better finished edge. Okay, we're getting pretty close to the end. I actually don't think there's that much more work that we need to do.
Just the 44 head fins, the rear cover plate, the acrylic dome side rings, rear tad, internal operator harness, along with various other minutiae. Thank you for watching, but there is work to be done.
See you next time.